Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. My name is Matt Delvecchio, specializing in life transitions, downsizing in the senior living industry.
And I'm Corrie Sirota, a clinical social worker and author of Someone Died, Now What?
Well, wasn't that something, Corrie? That's a first for us, wonderful $15,000 donation on the spot. So that's something else. And we want to cheer on Vince and Victoria.
Yeah, it's heartwarming. It's a great cause, and there's wonderful, generous people out there. So when we could make that match, it's just beautiful.
Fantastic.
So that said, life is unrehearsed, and today, in our discussion, and no exception, we are looking now at our segment called Helping Moms and Dads. We're providing guidance and support to the sandwich generation. We like to share interesting and knowledgeable topics with guests that cover a vast array of subjects, so that typically focus on families, helping families cope and the challenges of the aging process. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Matt, because this week is no exception.
Yeah, our Helping Mums and Dads segment that we've been doing for a little bit here in the second half is really gaining steam, particularly for those in the sandwich generation worrying about their own families and maybe their mom and dad, even the grandparents. So today we want to talk about a really, I suppose, sensitive subject and related around caregiving. And, more than 8 million Canadians are informal or unpaid caregivers for a family member or friend with a long-term health condition, disability, or aging needs. That's almost 1 in 4 people here in Canada. It's a staggering number that's anticipated to grow as our population ages. What is usually not discussed, though, is the financial and emotional toll on caregivers and what can be done about it. So that's why we reached out to Dr. Amy Dupre. Dr. Amy is an internationally renowned expert on lifestyle issues relating to retirement, aging, caregiving, and family dynamics. With a Ph.D. in social work, Dr. Amy, as she's affectionately known, has provided down-to-earth, practical, and professionally informed guidance on life transitions to individuals, professionals, and organizations for over 30 years. Now, I think we've been having a little trouble getting Dr. Amy. Are you on the line? Not yet. Okay, we're still trying to...
Not yet.
Still trying to reach
Matt,
out to
let's talk
Dr.
about, this is your business. So while we're waiting for Dr. Amy to join us, I know that you can talk about this. This is, you're speaking to caregivers all the time.
Yeah, it's something we see certainly in the world that I am helping with seniors in their life transitions. And let's face it, almost all families are caregiving in one way or another. And it's challenging. It's challenging because you are normally thrown into the role of caregiving. It's not something that you could take caregiving 101 and practice for it. And it usually, the way it works is you're in that role of caregiving. And it starts off small and it just speeds up and it can get pretty heavy. And so we all often refer to it as it's a role that you fall into. And so we see that quite a bit. And because of the unknown, it's not like you're going to school for this. It's you love your mom, you love your dad, you love your husband, wife, your loved one, your children, and you're doing the best you can about this. And it's always challenging. And that's why we felt this issue, the financial and emotional toll on caregivers. It's not talked about. We know that people are caregiving. So that's why we want to bring Dr. Amy. And I think we finally have Dr. Amy on the line. Are you there, Dr. Amy?
I am right here.
All right. Okay. Wonderful. Dr. Amy Dupre, thank you for joining us. We've had you on a couple times. We'd love your opinion. And you've been doing a fair amount of conferences, webinars, Zoominars, if we can call them, on this very topic about the financial and emotional toll on caregivers. And I was just mentioning, Dr. Amy, about the role of caregiving is something we almost stumble upon. Next thing you know, you are a caregiver and you fall into that role, don't they?
Absolutely. And, that's exactly what I was going to say, is that most people don't plan to be a caregiver. And it often occurs in a crisis. And I know, you've shared some numbers. And so I think, we have to look at how do we all become a little bit more realistic that it's likely at some point we're going to be a caregiver. Typically we start for caring for the generations before us, like our parents and aunts and uncles and maybe even grandparents. And then we move into caring for our own generation, our spouses and partners, our friends, our siblings. And we have to start, I think, building this in a little bit more to our thinking so that we're not caught unprepared.
I hear you, and what I understand, and from both firsthand knowledge and all the work you do, statistically, the role of caregiver not only can happen overnight, but it also typically can fall on women's shoulders. So I wanted to talk about that a little bit, and about how maybe you can provide us with a summary about, given that it falls on women's shoulders, what's the true financial cost to caregivers?
Well, I'm so glad you asked that, because there are a number of things I think that people don't think about. So typically we think about the real costs, if you're actually contributing to the care, like let's say you're contributing towards someone's home care, or you're contributing towards if they're living in a retirement residence and you're contributing towards that. But there are a lot of costs we don't necessarily build in and think of as caregiving costs, and especially as women. We may actually hire people to do some of the things that we're able to do in our own life because we're caregiving. So if we're in the sandwich generation and caring for kids too, we may be paying for more childcare because we're busy caregiving. If we're a long distance caregiver, we may be traveling and we don't consider that in caregiving costs, but that can get very expensive. I was a long distance caregiver for quite a while, and that was a big cost to me quite frequently. And then there are these hidden costs, and again, especially for women, things like turning down promotions, leaving their jobs because they're going to be a caregiver, going part-time, retiring, and I put that in quotes, when they're, leaving really work sooner than they expected to, can obviously very much impact current income. But here's the real kicker. We don't always factor in the impact on our future earnings. So similarly, when we stop, and are out of the workforce to have kids, we may be focused on thinking about, well, this is what I'm not going to earn right now, but we're likely also impacting our retirement income because we're not contributing, and putting away money for that. So that's a hidden cost we don't often think about.
You're listening to Life Unrehearsed with Matt Delvecchio and Corrie Sirota, and that's the voice of Dr. Amy Dupre, and we're talking about life transitions and some of the financial and emotional toll on caregivers. Dr. Amy, you're bringing up such an important point about sort of these, we'll call it, unforeseen costs that especially women have to absorb here. So are there some solutions? What can caregivers do to circumvent some of these financial challenges?
I think there are a number of things we can do. One of the first things may sound so obvious, but just to recognize the cost, right? To be realistic because if we haven't built it in, we need to do that. Obviously, if you're working with a financial planner, you want to start talking about these costs and about making sure you built them into your financial plan. And then I also think caregiving, I say it over and over, but it's not a journey, right? It's not a solo activity. And we have to look at how do we involve more people in the caregiving with us in a realistic way. And I think this is especially important for women because we often do take on this thing where we're supposed to provide all the care versus we're supposed to make sure somebody gets the best care possible. And that's a different mindset. And sometimes, this takes creativity. It takes sitting down with a professional or a friend and really who else could be helping us with some of these things where we don't feel like we have to do everything.
So that's one really important piece of it. Are there other kinds of options that caregivers can explore?
Well, it depends on programs available, obviously. If there's some government help, that's fabulous. But I think a lot of the times it's the informal things we need to be doing that we're not doing in involving other people. There's a story I often tell about this woman who was just amazing in utilizing the resources in her life. And when her husband ended up with, he had terminal cancer, but he lived quite a while. And she was so creative in utilizing the people, her friends, to help with things, things like meal preparation. This may sound like not a big deal, but it was a huge deal. They took care of it for a year, right? And we think about some costs related to that. You know, a lot of times the costs, again, are kind of subtle and hidden, but they can become extremely expensive over time. She's called the high school and asked if they had a volunteer program that the students were participating in. Could she be part of that, where they came and maintained their yard while the husband was ill? And for a year, the students came over and took care of shoveling snow and taking care of the yard work. Like, do you see what I mean? Like, these are things that most of us wouldn't think about, and it's amazing what the difference is.
Exactly, and it's just being able to be able to ask. You know, we have to head out to traffic, Dr. Amy, but we're going to switch over from financial to the emotional side of caregiving, and we want to address an extremely sensitive topic that you have to deal with all the time, and that's about parents being about perhaps somewhat selfish. And how do we deal with the selfish parent? It has to be my daughter that takes care of me. I don't want any other help, and many other examples like that. So we're going to be addressing that. But first, we have to head out to the CJAD Traffic Center, and we're going to hear from Mark Shalhoub.
Welcome back to Life Unrehearsed. It's Corrie Sirota here with my co-host Matt Delvecchio, and we are talking about caregiving and the role of caregiving. We've talked a little bit about the financial piece, but now we want to talk about the emotional piece, and we're very fortunate to have Dr. Amy Dupre in studio to help us navigate this whole topic. While I imagine, or I want to believe, that most parents are grateful for the role of someone who plays the caregiver, at the same time, there's probably some that kind of appear outright selfish. And what do I mean by that? It may be a parent that insists that their daughter or son take care of them and nobody else, even if it's not all that convenient or even makes sense in that or feasible. So I imagine that you've seen that in your work. How do you deal with that?
It's, this is a very tough situation, Corrie, and I had the opportunity to share with Matt a story about a family I worked with where the mom really insisted that she had a couple of kids, and they all lived at least 45 minutes away. There were 3 kids, actually, 45 minutes away. They had young families, and she needed care, and they were very involved, and they helped arrange care, but they couldn't be there all the time. And she kept firing the caregiver and saying, I only want you. I only want you. And the daughter ultimately called me and was just pulling her hair out and said, I don't know what to do. We're all struggling to try to be there for my mom, but this just isn't realistic. And unfortunately, that was a very difficult situation. And I really worked with the daughter about the fact that she had a right to have a life too. And, boundaries are hard for all of us to put in place. But I always say a solution that's good for one family member at the expense of the other family members is just not a sustainable solution, and we need sustainable. So they helped their mom, said they would, of course, be there to help her arrange the caregivers. She kept firing them, and then she did end up falling and ended up having to go to our assisted living. And the mother ended up getting kicked out of the assisted living facility because she was smoking in a non-smoking facility. So she was just a very difficult woman who only wanted her kids. And the hard part on most kids is they want to be there for their parents, but you can't become a total doormat. And in those cases, they need support. They need to figure out what's realistic for them to be doing and what's too much. And a lot of times that means it could be as simple as sitting with a friend and figuring that out, or it may mean having to work with a professional to say, help me here, because I have seen families turn themselves inside out for a parent who was just unrealistically demanding, and you could see everybody was kind of going down in the ship, which is not obviously sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's Dr. Amy Dupre here with Matt and Corrie on Life Unrehearsed, and we're talking about the emotional toll on caregivers, and usually a role, as we talked about earlier, that you fell upon, weren't trained for. And Dr. Amy, we hear these stories as well in my world, and I think it's so important, and I'd love to expand because there are many caregivers listening. And as you mentioned, many, I would have to say the majority, are women caregivers, a spouse, a daughter. How do you get your own life back while still caring for other people?
Yeah, and I want to go back, if it's okay, and add to what I said on the financial, because it fits here too.
Sure.
Sometimes we think there are these big solutions that are going to solve things, and a lot of times it's little shifts. And just like with the financial, it may be, finding small solutions versus the one big solution, but those small solutions are the things that make the difference. Same here, I would say. So when we talk about, how does it have a toll in people's lives, right? We know that that's a big issue when they're caregiving. We know, obviously, emotionally, it has a big toll on people's lives, right? That there's lots of research showing what the stress does, both physically and mentally to people when they're in enormous caregiver stress, and also to our relationships. And our relationships get so impacted. And again, women often bear the burden here because they may be caring for multiple generations. And I think we're still, whether or not, it doesn't matter how enlightened we are as women, I still think we often feel this great responsibility to make sure that everybody is okay in the world. And we do it at our own expense a lot of times. So I think we have to recognize the impact it may have on our marriages, on our family life, and then we have to say, what can we do about this? How do we make this better? And I think a lot of it, again, I get it sounds so simplistic to say, we have to kind of own that we are not responsible for taking care of absolutely everything. And if we really believe that, we can start looking at realistic solutions that involve other people and get them involved in helping with the care as well. And I've worked with so many families to help them see how to involve. A lot of times people say to me, there is nobody but me to do this.
Right.
And I'm sure you've all heard that. I am the only person who can do this. And when we really start looking, there's often a friend of the person who needs caregiving who's willing to do things like go pick up some groceries, because almost everybody goes to the grocery store, right? At least when we're not in the middle of a pandemic. So, people are often willing to pick up some groceries so you're out of that responsibility. Or if you have kids and they need to be picked up, there are people who are willing to take your kids when they pick up their kids. So we start becoming creative and looking for the solutions that, again, are often the small solutions, but those small solutions add up to a big solution and start to reduce the burden.
What I'm thinking about, as you're describing, is those small solutions make a big difference. And I want to take it one step further very quickly because we are running out of time. Aside from friends and family, what professionals can help assist families in the caregiving journey?
Well, that's a very good question, isn't it? Because there are a lot of them out there. And you two are two professionals who are great examples of this. There are also care managers and care navigators who are great at coming in and assessing a situation and being able to look at solutions that we don't see ourselves. Sometimes a family needs to sit down with a facilitator or a mediator to help realistically look at who's going to do what and how do you spread the responsibility out. A social worker, maybe somebody who can come in and sit down, if it's you and your parents, and have conversations about what they want, what you're able to do, and where the gaps are that could be filled. So there are a lot of professionals who can contribute to this.
There certainly are.
I also add, Matt, of course, we also want solutions like retirement residences and, those professionals who work there who can be very helpful.
Sure, absolutely. And I would also add one more. I know social media is becoming increasingly important. And you know what? There are some wonderful support groups on Facebook and others. We want to try to promote those because they're out there. You just got to look and search them out. But some of these support groups are also very, very helpful. Dr. Amy, we're running out of time here. But if people want to find out a little bit more about you and what you do, how can people get a hold of you?
They can go to my website, which is, you often have to put the www in, so it's www.dramy.life, L-I-F-E, instead of .com. And I'm glad that you mentioned support groups. They're a fabulous resource.
Wonderful. Well, Dr. Amy Dupre, thank you so much for coming on, and we need to have you back to continue this conversation.
Thanks for the opportunity. Have a great day.
Thank you. It's Dr. Amy Dupre, life transition specialist. All right, Corrie, what do we have coming up next week?
Well, with Valentine's Day just around the corner, we thought we would talk about what are the types of qualities or behaviors that we should be looking for in a relationship. And we're going to do that with Lisa Brookman, co-owner of West Island Therapy and Wellness. And someone was struck by Cupid at 99 years old, proving it's never too late to fall in love. We're going to hear from him as well.
Yeah, we actually have a couple couples that have met in the senior living communities and can't wait to have them on, including this 99-year-old wonderful, charming gentleman. Well, thank you all for tuning in to Life Unrehearsed. And as a reminder, for all your inquiries or assistance with navigating home care, seniors' residences, or downsizing, it'd be my pleasure to help. Our services are completely free. Call me at Lianis Senior Transition Support at 514-622-8074 or lianisservices.com. Many thanks to our technical producer, Cedric. Did a great job. Thank you. You can listen to Life Unrehearsed here on CJAD 800 every Saturday at 3 p.m.